What is the one thing you could do that makes a man think about you constantly without sending a single text, making a call, or trying to pull his attention in any way? It costs you nothing. No effort, no chasing, just silence. I know it sounds almost too basic to matter. It even feels like doing nothing could never be powerful. But what I'm about to explain will completely shift how you understand attraction and attention. Most women end up doing more than enough. They text first, they call first, they keep the conversation alive, they make the plans, they carry the emotional weight. They try to be consistent, present, and engaging. And yet over time, something still changes. He starts pulling back. He becomes less responsive. The energy drops. And the more effort they put in, the more distant he becomes. If that feels familiar, there's a reason for it. Here's the part nobody really explains clearly. The more easily your attention is available, the less the brain values it. But the moment that availability disappears, something flips inside his mind. When you stop reaching out, he notices the silence. He looks at his phone more often. He replays your last interaction. He starts wondering what changed. And suddenly, you're not just part of his day anymore. You're in his thoughts without trying. This is where the shift happens. Not through effort, but through absence. Most people are taught the opposite. They believe staying visible, consistent, and always present is what keeps interest alive. The fear is that if you step back, he will forget you or move on. But in reality, constant presence often turns into predictability, and predictability slowly kills curiosity. The mind doesn't obsess over what feels guaranteed. It obsesses over what feels uncertain or missing. When you're always available, he knows where he stands. He knows you'll reply. He knows the connection is there whenever he wants it. That comfort creates stability, but it also removes urgency. The moment you withdraw, that certainty breaks. Now he doesn't know what you're thinking. He doesn't know if you're busy, upset, losing interest, or simply moving in a different direction. That uncertainty creates a mental gap, and the brain naturally tries to fill it. He starts searching for answers that aren't given. That search turns into thoughts about you. More thoughts lead to curiosity. Curiosity leads to emotional focus. It's not something he consciously decides. It's automatic. At a deeper level, human attention is wired to respond to movement and change. What stays constant fades into the background. What shifts or disappears suddenly becomes noticeable. So when you were always there, you blended into routine. But when you step back, you become noticeable again. And the longer that silence lasts, the stronger it can feel on his end. Because now there's no closure, no clear explanation, and nothing to mentally settle the situation. So his mind keeps circling back, trying to make sense of it. He may even start questioning himself. Did he do something wrong? Did he miss something? Is someone else now in your life? Is he losing you without realizing it? These questions don't come from logic. They come from lack of clarity. And lack of clarity keeps attention locked in. Absence also has another effect. It forces someone to realize what was taken for granted. When your attention was always there, it didn't feel like something that could be lost. It felt accessible, easy, available. But when it's gone, its value becomes clearer in hindsight. And that's when reflection begins. Not because you did more, but because you stopped doing everything. That early stage you're describing is how obsession slowly builds. It doesn't start loudly. It starts as curiosity, then turns into quiet preoccupation. And if the silence continues, it can deepen into full mental fixation. And all of it is triggered by one simple shift. You stopped reaching out. What makes this dynamic feel so powerful is how it completely changes the emotional balance between two people. In the beginning, a man often feels like he's leading things. He decides when to text, when to step back, when to show effort, and when to disappear a little. That rhythm gives him a sense of control over the connection. But when you suddenly stop reaching out, that control quietly slips away without any confrontation. There's no argument, no explanation, no emotional scene, just your absence. And now the position flips. He becomes the one checking his phone. He becomes the one wondering what changed. He becomes the one waiting. And that's not a position most men are used to when they actually care about someone. So instead of pulling away further, many of them start leaning in. They try more. They engage more. And because that effort is coming from their own choice, rather than being pulled out of them, it feels more genuine to them. Then something deeper starts happening in his mind. When your presence is no longer constant, his imagination takes over. Without real-time interaction to ground his thoughts, he starts filling the gaps himself. He remembers the best moments more clearly than everything else. The easy conversations, the good energy, the feeling of connection. The neutral or forgettable parts fade. The frustrating moments shrink. Not because he is intentionally rewriting reality, but because the mind naturally leans toward what feels emotionally rewarding when something is missing. At that point, you stop being just someone he talks to. You start becoming someone he might be losing. And the idea of loss carries more weight than routine presence ever could. This is also why silence often creates more impact than effort. Constant communication removes uncertainty. And without uncertainty, there is no mental pull. Everything feels settled, predictable, already figured out. And when something feels fully figured out, the mind stops chasing it. But silence reintroduces uncertainty. He doesn't know what you're thinking anymore. He doesn't know if you've lost interest, moved on, or simply stepped back. That lack of clarity creates mental loops. He starts replaying old conversations, analyzing details, searching for meaning in things he previously ignored. It's not something he chooses to do. It happens automatically because the brain dislikes unfinished emotional situations. It wants closure, so it keeps returning to the source until it finds it. This is also where ego becomes involved. When a man senses that his access to you might not be guaranteed anymore, it can create discomfort. Not knowing where he stands can make him question his own place in your life. That discomfort often pushes him to reach out, not because he's been asked to, but because he wants to restore certainty. And in that moment, the dynamic has already shifted. He's no longer just responding, he's initiating. But it's important not to misunderstand what's really happening here. This isn't about playing games or using silence as a tactic to control someone. It's about understanding how attention and value naturally work in human behavior, and how one-sided effort slowly changes how someone perceives a connection. When one person consistently does all the reaching, all the planning, all the emotional work, the other person naturally starts to invest less. Not always because they don't care, but because they don't feel the need to try harder. The connection becomes too easy to access, and effort disappears. Stepping back simply interrupts that pattern. It removes over-availability and brings back balance. And in that space, something important becomes clear. You don't have to constantly prove your worth to be valued. A woman who has her own life, her own focus, and her own direction naturally carries a different kind of presence. Not because she is trying to be distant, but because she isn't centered around constant validation from one person. That grounded energy stands out. And when someone gets used to that presence and then suddenly feels its absence, it creates awareness. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually. They start noticing the space you used to fill. At the core of all of this is a simple psychological pattern. People don't stay mentally engaged with what feels fully predictable. The mind responds more strongly to things that feel uncertain, changing, or not fully secured. So when communication is constant, the emotional system stays calm. But when it suddenly stops, that calm is replaced with tension. And the mind naturally tries to resolve that tension by thinking about the person again and again. The longer that uncertainty lasts, the more mentally present you become. Not because you're doing more, but because you're no longer fully accessible. And that is the real shift. That shift changes how he experiences you almost immediately. You're no longer the woman who is constantly reachable, constantly responding, constantly there. You become the woman who is no longer available in the same way. The woman who stepped back. The woman who slipped out of easy access. And that change alone can completely alter how she exists in his mind. Because men tend to pursue what feels like it's slipping out of reach with far more intensity than what is already guaranteed. When something was effortless to access, it rarely triggered urgency. But when that access suddenly changes, attention sharpens. The important part here is that none of this requires you to force anything. There is no perfect message to craft, no strategy to execute, no act to perform. It is not about pretending to be distant or playing a role. It is simply about stepping out of the pattern of over-giving your attention to someone who hasn't shown equal effort in return. And that difference matters. This isn't about being cold or punishing someone. It's about having standards.
I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. They hold weight, they carry value, and they are best given to people who actually show consistency, effort, and appreciation. When you stop reaching out to someone who has been passively receiving your attention, something interesting happens. The space you leave behind makes him feel the impact of your absence. And in that space his response becomes revealing. If he truly values you, he will feel the shift and move toward you. If he doesn't, nothing changes. And that clarity saves you from pouring more into something one-sided. Either outcome puts you in a better position. One brings reconnection, the other brings clarity. Both remove uncertainty.
Silence often communicates more confidence than words ever could. A woman who steps back without explanation, without emotional reaction, without chasing closure, shows a quiet kind of self-assurance. She isn't waiting around for validation. She isn't refreshing her phone or overthinking every interaction. She has redirected her focus back to her own life. And that shift is noticeable. Men can feel the difference between someone who is emotionally attached and waiting and someone who has emotionally stepped back and is no longer anchored to them. Even if they can't explain it clearly, they sense the change in energy. In many cases, this becomes a kind of unspoken test, not something you consciously set up, but something that naturally reveals itself through distance. If there is real interest, distance creates discomfort, and discomfort often leads to action. He reaches out. He checks in. He tries to reconnect. If there was never real investment, then silence is met with more silence. And as difficult as that realization can feel, it removes confusion. It ends guessing. It stops you from investing further into something that wasn't going anywhere emotionally. That clarity is powerful, even when it's uncomfortable. Women who naturally embody this approach aren't operating from desperation. They don't chase what pulls away. They don't overextend themselves trying to secure attention. They don't shrink or reshape their lives around someone who hasn't shown consistent commitment. Instead, they trust something simple. Real interest shows itself through action, not ambiguity. And if that action isn't there, they continue forward without forcing it. That mindset isn't about being distant. It's about being grounded. It removes the constant anxiety of trying to decode mixed signals or overanalyze inconsistent behavior. It brings attention back to your own life, your goals, your relationships, your growth, your peace. And in that shift, something important happens internally as well. When you stop over-investing emotionally in someone who isn't meeting you halfway, you begin to regain clarity. You start seeing things without emotional distortion. You stop interpreting confusion as potential. You start recognizing patterns more accurately. You also reconnect with yourself, the version of you that existed before the overthinking, before the waiting, before the emotional uncertainty. And that version is usually calmer, more focused, and more self-directed. That return to self is where real strength comes from. From the other side, silence also forces reflection.
When your presence is no longer constantly accessible, a man can no longer stay in emotional neutrality.
He can't just enjoy your attention passively anymore. He has to confront whether he values it enough to act on it. That's where internal questions begin to surface. Whether he misses you, whether he took things for granted, whether he still wants the connection, whether he allowed something meaningful to slip into routine. Those questions don't come from pressure, they come from absence. And absence doesn't create answers on its own, it creates tension. The mind naturally tries to resolve that tension by focusing on the source of it. That's why thoughts of you become more frequent, not less, when you step back. But it's important to separate reality from illusion here. This isn't about manipulating emotions or controlling someone's behavior. It's about understanding how attention naturally shifts when availability changes. There's a difference between pretending to be unavailable and actually living a life where your attention isn't centered around one person. One is performance, the other is authenticity. And authenticity always carries more weight. A woman who is genuinely busy with her own life, genuinely invested in her own direction, and not emotionally dependent on someone else's validation will always stand out more than someone trying to act detached, because it's real. And when something is real, it doesn't need effort to be noticed. It just is. The final piece of this is what happens internally when you stop chasing. Because the biggest shift often isn't in the other person, it's in you. You stop operating from anxiety. You stop over-investing in uncertainty. You stop rearranging your emotional world around someone who isn't consistently showing up. And that is where your power returns. Not through silence alone, but through what that silence creates in your life. Clarity, self-respect, emotional stability, focus, direction. From that place, your energy changes completely. You are no longer reaching for validation. You are choosing where your attention goes and where it doesn't. And that kind of presence is not something you have to force anyone to notice.